In a time of great change, we're all making efforts to become more ethical, more educated people. The Transection podcast interviews guests from many different backgrounds to bring diverse aspects of the human experience to life through humour, authenticity, and personal stories. We are privileged to get a glimpse into other people's realities and to get first-hand advice and information from people on the front line of great social change. I'm Harris Eddie Hill, an out and proud trans non-binary person, an inclusive mental health coach and a best-selling author, and this is the Transection podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome back today. I'm joined by the social media superstar, Patrick Walden, who is a psychotherapist. Whereabouts are you based, Patrick?
I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the
Nice.
US. Yeah.
That's cool. And you're a
And
psychotherapist?
I am a psychotherapist. Yep. Actually moved to Philadelphia 1 month before the pandemic began, from Massachusetts, where I lived for probably 14 years, give or take.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that was an interesting time to arrive here. Um, so at first I was, got a new office in Center City and had two ever, clients in person. And then very quickly the world shut down and I started the whole working from home online therapy thing. Luckily though, I had already, a lot of my colleagues at the time were like, online therapy, what do we use? How do I do this? How does this even work? Will this work as therapy? Will it be effective? But I had luckily already been doing therapy with trans folks, especially in rural or remote areas who weren't able to access just good therapeutic care. So I knew what I was doing at that point, which was good. It was like the one thing I had in a new city and changing world. Um, and and also have been meeting with folks all over, just for brief therapy, like trans, non-binary folks who are looking for letters for surgery or hormones or things like that. So we just have a real brief therapeutic connection, really for the purpose of me writing the letter. So yeah, I'm in Philadelphia and now back in a physical office again, which is nice to, yeah, to have the delineation between home and work.
Yeah. Do you prefer being in an office?
I like having the option, there are some days where I'm like, it's raining and I don't really want to walk 10 minutes down the street. But yeah, it is nice to have a space, even if I'm just seeing all online remote folks, where I can put on my pants and be seen and see the world. And also there's something nice and symbolic about shutting the door at the end of the day to help compartmentalize the work that I do
Yeah, that's
and be able
nice.
to unwind. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. So did you only really get into the social media stuff because of the pandemic, or were you already quite big on social media?
This is an accident. I never tried to have a big following on social media. I made a Facebook page for myself before I could afford a website, and that's why it's there. And I have no idea why or how I gathered a large following. I know some people tried to do that. I think it may have to do with I did some workshops at colleges, and I think maybe some people started to follow me and things like that. But yeah, at this point, I've got a big following, and I'm not sure quite what to do with it.
So there's
Um,
no tips for anyone else who's trying to do the same thing.
I think the tip would just be I just post stuff when I feel like it. And I don't know if that will work for other people or not, but when I'm moved by something, I'll post it. And sometimes that's 6 times in one day, and sometimes that's not for 2 weeks. Um, and you mentioned, I'm happy to talk a little bit about some of the downfalls of being really seen. One thing is that I wasn't out to everyone in my life as trans, and that included my in-laws. And that was the big one. And so, like, while many people might meet me and maybe assume that I'm trans, many people might meet me and not assume that I'm trans. I feel like these days a lot of people meet me and are like, maybe assume I'm a cis gay man or whatever. Gender is a very interesting thing that people like to project all over the place. But yeah, so I didn't really have it out there because I wasn't ready to come out. But then I did because I'm actually beginning a like child having process. Like my partner and I are beginning a fertility journey together. And I was like, if it were up to me, like I would have come out to another cis person in the world who didn't have to know, but ultimately decided to come out to my in-laws because I don't want my kid to bear the burden of having to keep a secret for me. And
Wow.
yeah, luckily I have a good supportive group of people who like trans men who have been, transitioning for 10 plus years that I can access who were really supportive in that part of my decision making and ultimately were like, yeah, this is the first like gift you're giving your kid. Like, well done. So then I was like, okay, fuck it. Like I'm gonna really, I don't know, come out, I guess, in this big way. Again, total accident that I have this following, but like I noticed I was actively hiding parts of myself and then worrying, what will it be like? Am I going to lose followers if I
Mm,
come out as trans? Are people going to harass me? Or, people can do all sorts of things. And I don't even really remember what it was at this point, but oh, yes, now I do. Someone left me a review on my Facebook page. Because I must have posted something supporting trans youth or something of that nature. I don't remember what it was, but this person gave me a 1-star negative review on Facebook and told me, I think that the language people use now like is like, oh, if you support trans youth then you're a groomer, which is really terrible language. I'm like a trauma survivor and someone who helps people in their trauma journeys, and that's just such a shitty thing to say.
mm,
Um, anyway, so he was not recommending my services, and so I wrote back and said, "Well, I don't think we've ever met. How is it that you can, like not recommend my services?" And he said something else nasty, and so I was like, okay, let's like put this to the test. So I put on my Facebook page like what had happened and what I was called exactly and why, and maybe like show me some love and head on over to my review section and like leave me a positive review. And his thing must have been reported. It's not even there anymore. And I ended that day. I mean, I really processed this all in one day. Like I ended that day writing this guy a note thanking him because really I had like 30 people write lovely things about me, some of whom I've actually met, some of whom I haven't. I've had, that same day I had people reach out to me being like, yeah, that's shitty. I didn't know you were trans, but you were awesome to my kid and we love you and we still talk about you. And I had a great day. And so I just thanked him for that and moved on with my life. And that's sort of where that's at. No, this is a tangent, but
that's
yes, I have
cool.
a social media following.
It's a lot to manage. So
Uh-huh.
you talked about your motivation for coming out being that you didn't want your, future child to carry a burden of, your secret, which in itself was quite deep. But also there must be Are there benefits for you personally now, having come out and gone for it?
Well, I don't have to I don't have to have that same burden, I guess, of worrying so much. I feel like when I first was starting my transition, it was a really vulnerable time. Like, and I cared so much about passing, and I cared so much about not sounding gay, and I cared so much about sounding as butch as possible and having my intonation be just the right way. And I've come to not care about that stuff so much anymore, especially when I think about, some of the clinical encounters I've had, or just trans people are very observant of the world because we have to be. Some of the things I've observed about just how harmful it is for all men to have to worry about how gay they sound, or being vulnerable, or the things that get in the way of men being able to connect with one another in the world around them, and even parts of themselves, is just so depressing. And um, I'd rather people know that I'm trans or think that I'm gay than have to lop off entire parts of myself. Um, so that's that, you know?
Cool.
Yeah.
That's nice. So you talked about other parts of your identity that are important to you. What are the other aspects of you that you think about a lot and kind of affects your how you see the world and also how you practice your psychotherapy?
Yeah. Yeah, it is very important that I'm trans in the way that I see the world, and also it's just one aspect of who I am. And so I have to be careful not to sort of be that was the other piece of not wanting to come out publicly, is I don't want to be pigeonholed as like the trans therapist. Like, I'm a great therapist outside of that, and that's important to me. While I don't care as much about being outed or being out, I do care about trans people being seen for their merits alone, and people in general. And so one of the I guess I'll back up and just say, I became much like the Facebook fame was an accident, so was me becoming a therapist. So I I never set out to I wasn't like, when I grow up, I want to be a therapist, although certainly the scene was set for me to become one. I more was just like, I had finished undergraduate school. I went in to become a teacher to young children and realized I didn't want to stand up in front of a whole classroom. Like, that's not really my thing. And found myself more drawn to the sort of on the fringes kids, or kids who were struggling socially or behaviorally, and taught preschool for a year, and was like, okay, well, I want to actually be able to afford my bills and life. So that was cute while it lasted, and really a lovely job while it lasted. And then I had my first big heartbreak happen. And more than one person told me, I just didn't know what to do with my life at that point. Like, everything just sort of changed. And I was in my younger 20s. And more than one person was like, you should go to social work school. I could see you in social work school. So I just went to social work school, having really not much of an idea about what that meant, and found an AmeriCorps program linked up with the graduate degree that helped fund my education and my living situation, paid for, and gave me a stipend. And that just seemed like a fine idea to do next. And then, having grown up sort of with a working class background, already at the end of graduate school, I was applying for jobs and realized that, oh, the only jobs I can get are a therapist job. I could be a therapist at a community mental health center. So I guess that's what I'll do. I mean, that really is the story of that. And then, honestly, your first job anywhere as a community mental health therapist, you learn a lot. quickly about how to be a therapist. And then um, I started to transition. I was like, oh boy, I don't want to come out to like 40 clients and their families and also all of my colleagues. I think that's another moment of like self-preservation that I'm talking about around being trans. It's like I'm not going to put myself through that. So I got a job at a hospital, like a inpatient hospital, because I was told that there's an LGBT unit there, really hoping that that would be a good and safe place for me to medically transition on the workplace, because I wanted to use my degree and still have a job that I've earned. But it ended up being not that great. But I learned a lot there too, which is good, including how to be good to myself and stand up for myself. Um, but yeah, I had no idea I wanted to be a therapist. Eventually, I was able to just take the leap and start my own private practice. And I'm really, really glad I've done that. And I sort of had some like moving and life changing things. And there was one brief period of time where I went back working for a community mental health agency. And I think it took me 2 months to quit and like be like, no, this is still not good for me and what I want to do and how I want to practice my work. And have not looked back since. Just so happy to have built this practice. And so identities that I bring to it, um, I'm a trauma survivor myself, and um, have also experienced a lot of like grief and loss throughout my life. And so I bring that experience with me. So it's not so much like a language barrier. The same thing with like my queer identity. And in terms of therapeutic orientations, like I really do feel it sounds perhaps a bit corny, but my biggest therapeutic orientation is just like love. Like I figure out how to love each one of my clients. I feel like so many of us who experience neglect and abuse weren't taught the right messages about love. And so in turn, don't know how to properly love ourselves. And so that's that's a big thing that I show my clients how to do, how to love themselves, how to be loved, how to feel loved, and take that into the real world, to hopefully change their lives for the better. But like on paper, I'll call that a relational model. Um, and also, I have been trained in EMDR, which is a really cool approach. And I see a lot of movement happen for folks. But I'm not really married to sticking to any one thing. I really feel like EMDR is supposed to be this course of treatment that you see from beginning to end. And I've got, I've, know where we are and things, but if someone just had a breakup or a big trigger come up that isn't what we wrote in the note before, like we're going to deal with that
Mm.
then and then get back to it. It's really an individualized thing.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
So, for
Yeah.
those who don't know what EMDR is, do you want to describe it a little bit?
Mhm. Sure. Yeah. So it's stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Um, and the theory behind it is that you find a way to bilaterally stimulate your brain. So stimulating both halves of your brain as well as the rest of your brain to allow it to, one, create a soothing sensation. So, you know, moving eyes back and forth is a bilateral stimulation method, or tapping one leg and then the next, or if you don't want to touch your body for whatever reason, working through something, you can tap a table back and forth. Bilateral stimulation is something we see happen happen as humans naturally in the world as a way of soothing. So a parent will rock a baby back and forth, and the baby will be soothed. Or we can read a book by moving our eyes back and forth and get really sleepy at night. And that's why, because it sort of creates this soothing sensation. And the idea is so we come up with a list of targets. We identify a target. We light up the target by way of sort of using our senses and our memory. Like if we are talking about a really scary car crash that happened that makes someone really tense up and, sort of get anxious when they're in cars now. The idea is that the past is superimposing itself onto the present. And what we want to do through EMDR is properly process the past so that it's not showing up in the present anymore, and it's properly processed back in our long-term memory versus popping around in our short-term memory, ready to just kind of go off at any time. And that can happen with something traumatic like an event, like a car accident. And it can also, we can use it for something more like complex trauma, like stuff that might show up relationally and, a relationship. But it's really about maybe long-term neglect, feeling abandoned as a child. So we can have a specific event that we light up, or we can have sort of this feeling that we can light up. And what we're sort of lighting up ultimately is a neural network in someone's brain. So associations that we have. And through the process of EMDR, my client has basically one foot in the present here with me, as well as one foot in their past as they work through this traumatic event or memory. As well as they're doing the soothing sensation. And so that allows people to go to these difficult places, but also the EMDR allows all of the parts of the brain to sort of chat with one another. So short-term to long-term memory, as well as the hippocampus, which is the part of our brain that allows the communication to happen. So that's kind of, there's no really short way of describing EMDR, but it's really a really helpful, useful approach for trauma.
Yeah, that's cool. I'm also a trauma survivor and have talked about the process that I've gone through for my own healing, and super passionate about it. And EMDR is one of the things I haven't tried. So, I mean, I don't know. At the moment, I feel like I've got nothing left to work on, but I'm sure something will pop up later and I'll be like, oh, I'll try some EMDR.
Yeah. And the cool thing about it is it's, I think, just a less cruel way of treating trauma than like exposure therapy or tell me every single detail of that terrible thing that you already went through. Like, I just don't see that as so
No,
helpful or necessary when we have, I don't even need to know what someone's processing for it to be
100%.
effective, you
Yeah,
know?
100%. I mean,
Yeah.
I know that NLP in the past has been considered like real pseudoscience and stuff, but in recent times they've done more better studies on it, and they've identified that some of the modalities within that are really effective for things like trauma and depression and all sorts. And one of the principles of NLP is that if someone's got a trauma, you don't make them practice the trauma, you don't make them practice the neural pathways, and we don't even have to discuss what it is. We just diffuse it and kind of heal it, and we don't have to go there or tell the story again and practice it again, because we don't
Yep.
want people to be triggered. They need to be grounded enough to work through it.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
how obviously you've trained in psychotherapy, and then you've also got these other modalities that you use for the trauma.
Mm.
um how do you feel about psychotherapy as a standalone approach to trauma? Because I know that for me, it took me 20 years to find a therapist who had these other modalities to help me heal. And up until
Sure.
then, nobody said, like, oh, well, I can't help you process that trauma, but these things can. Nobody told me. It was like pure luck or
Yeah.
divine intervention that I found that healing. So how do you feel about the traditional
Talk
stuff?
therapy. So,
Yeah.
you know, I think that the relationship that you have with your therapist is probably going to be the most important thing for any one individual. I remember back in grad school hearing this study that like 75% of why therapy is effective is your relationship with your therapist, which makes so much sense in the world to me. And then
Yeah.
the 25%, and maybe the numbers have changed since then, but 25% is that therapist's particular modality of treatment. Um, and that resonated with me then, and it still resonates with me now. Like, I think finding a good match for therapy is ultimately worth your while, you know, like, even if that means shopping around for a little bit of time. I think talk therapy by itself, I will also say, is not enough, in my professional opinion. Like, I see my clients as smart, resourceful, resilient people who already know what's happened to them and who've already tried many things before they've come to my office. And what I would never do to a client is like have them leave my office saying to themselves, like, well, I already knew that, but like, what do I do about it? I think that we need to give clients tangible tools, um, tangible treatment, but also tangible tools that they can leave the office with, so that I think therapy is just kind of practice for the real world, and like have to go back to their lives and be able to use some of this stuff. Like, because I've had a lot of situations where folks where our prefrontal cortex, like our logical brains, are chatting and like, yep, good idea. Yep, totally agree with you, Patrick. But then have seen people go back to their lives and like kind of pull the same shit, you know? And so we need effective, more long term tools to be giving people to. Otherwise, we're kind of wasting everyone's time.
Mm. Yeah, I've had sort of friends and clients in the past who've said, "Oh, I've been going to my therapist for 5 years," and I'm like, "Okay,
Mhm.
you know, how much better do you feel?" And they're like, "I don't."
Yeah,
And I'm
totally.
like,
Exactly.
and then when I say, like I had really successful treatment for PTSD. I lived with this PTSD for like 20 years.
Mhm.
Um, it was around being a survivor of assault as a kid, and um, that trauma was processed in 2 sessions. So when I mention, oh, I went through this, they go, oh, that must have taken a really long time. And I was like,
Yeah.
no, it was really
Yeah.
fast. It took two
Yeah.
hours. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
And I really feel, obviously it's different for everyone, and you can weigh in, but and it depends what type of trauma we're dealing with and how it's affected you developmentally and all that kind of stuff. It's not the same for everybody, but I do feel very passionate about this idea that we don't have to live with trauma long term. Once we're ready to deal with it should be
Yes.
relatively quick, right?
And we can heal from it. Yeah. Right. No, I totally agree with you. Yeah. And I think people often come into my office just feeling like this is fix me yesterday. This is, and also this is going to never be fixed. This is, I can't imagine a life without this pain and suffering. And that's one of the things I, part of my intake is like, okay, yeah, tell me like what your dream life looks like, you know? And someone might say to me like, well, I don't have, I'm not awoken with nightmares every night from my trauma, or like I can sleep through the night. And I'm like, no, that's not a dream life. Like, let's raise the bar here. Um, and the other thing is like, yeah, I want to see people get better. I don't, I want there to be, come a day where someone says to me, like, it's been lovely, but I don't need to come see you anymore. Or I might bring that up, too. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I often feel like when there's times that I've helped people to process trauma or deal with some big stuff, when they leave or they turn up to their last appointment, we don't know it's going to be their last appointment, but they
Mm-hmm.
turn up and I look at them and I go, are you finished? And they go, yes, that's what I came here to tell you. That is like the best part of the job when they
Oh
don't
my
need you
God.
anymore, right?
Yes, I have chills. Yeah, absolutely. Bittersweet too,
Yeah.
when because it's a relationship. It's some of our biggest relationships in our lives that we don't get to share with anybody or talk about outside of sessions. It's such an interesting career.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely. You also
yeah.
mentioned narrative therapy. What's that about? I've never heard of that.
Narrative therapy, I mean, in essence, is just about being able to tell our unique stories and have them be witnessed. So it's a whole therapeutic modality. I think the idea is like you're the main character of your life, and perhaps the stories you've been telling yourselves or the cognitive processes you've been having could use some edits. And one of my sort of like the thing on my card is like your story's not over yet, and particularly as a trans person, like that's where this really comes into play with my practice. Like I definitely changed my story. I definitely, changed the course of my destiny, as I think we all have the power to do day in and day out in big and small ways. And that's such a powerful thing. And often people get stuck in ruts and get stuck in cycles. And I can be someone who can bear witness to their story and also maybe allow them to see some alternative endings or next chapters. Um, and also, I literally use writing with people. So, one of the ways I do intakes or getting to know people is I will write a question on a piece of paper and hand it to them and put 5 minutes on a timer and just have them free write. And so, an example of a get to know you question would be, what am I struggling with or wanting to change? Who am I? What am I afraid of? And what's cool about using that technique with individual clients is like I've worked with a client before who was sexually abused by his father, and he just had a daughter, a baby girl. And his what am I afraid of answer was dad showing up at the front door. And how scary, how terrifying that felt. And that was really what he wrote about for 5 minutes. We worked together for 8 months, um, developed trust and talked about this topic. And clients forget, sometimes because I keep the notebook until the end. And so I write the date, I write the question. And so about 8 months later, I wrote, what am I afraid of? Not knowing what he was going to write. And I handed it back to him. And the answer had completely changed. Like his father didn't show up at all in the answer because he had processed that trauma. And I flipped back and showed him his own words, which is really powerful. It's not my assessment of what happened, 8 months ago. It's literally what you said. And there's no arguing with that, and it's quite a powerful experience for people. And the other thing that I do with narrative therapy is I have trans writing groups. So, and we do something similar. Actually, some of those questions I've used. What am I the first group together? Maybe there's 6 of us, and I'm sort of just leading the group and giving the prompts, and everybody is writing. And often I do these distant, so people show up on Zoom and get to see each other from all parts of the U.S. and sometimes elsewhere, and it's just a sacred healing space where we start with get to know you, who am I, what am I struggling with, and then like trans is as a prompt, or often I will create prompts from what's happening live in the group too, and just sort of work with that. We've written poems with each other's like work as one big compilation before, like lines from different people's writing. And one of my favorite prompts that I do with folks is have them write on each line how old they are. So the first line is 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way down to their current age. So each line is an age, and I have them go back and look at each of their former selves, thinking about like using the metaphor of like a deck of cards. We are the deck of cards. We are also each individual card, and each individual card makes up who we are now. And we've also been different versions of ourselves. And so I'll use for that age, prompt, I'll use prompts like trans is age 5, trans is age 13, age 21. And it's really fascinating to see what people write for that. And then I'll do the same thing, but I'll do love is for each age, like anything from like I'm 5 and I have a best friend to like a birthday party to, I'm 21 and I thought love was this abusive relationship, but I'm 31 now and I know what, having done the work, what good love actually feels like. And it becomes, if you can imagine, rather intimate, rather fast, because I'm not asking the easy questions here. And it's just, again, such a lovely shared space. And I'm going to do another group soon. I just can't wait for the next one. It's one of my favorite parts of my week.
That's lovely. What made you want to do it?
Do what?
To run your trans writing groups?
Well, being myself in trans spaces has been some of the times in my life where I just feel the most free. And, it's just been life-changing moments, like going to conferences or getting to be in certain groups. It's just looking around at each other's faces and being able to put it all down for a minute and being able to, back to I guess how I describe narrative therapy, like tell our stories and be witnessed. It's just something powerful about that. So when I learned about narrative therapy and I thought about maybe I would like to do some more group work outside of my community mental health stuff, I thought that this would be a really beautiful pairing.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
That's lovely. So I know that you don't advertise yourself and you don't want to be pigeonholed because of this one aspect of your identity, but obviously the fact that you're out and you've got a good following, it must mean that you attract a lot of trans non-binary clients, right?
Yes, I do. I will see cis people. I'm kidding. I I actually see, yep, I see a great deal of trans folks, and then I see a great deal of cis people as well. But yeah, a lot of trans people do reach out to me for therapy, which is lovely.
It's cool.
Yeah,
You must hear a lot of feedback about their previous experiences with other therapists.
yeah.
Given that you've kind of heard so much now, what would you like the rest of the therapy industry to know about serving our community?
Oh yeah. Well, if you want to be a trans ally, sign your name. Like, I guess is my big thing, or perhaps advice for any cis therapist who wants to take it. Like, I hear a lot of cis therapists just sort of not willing to do the work to learn. But what really gets my goat is cis therapists not feeling comfortable writing letters for trans people to access life affirming care, whether that be hormones or surgery or whatever. And I think what it comes down to is fear of liability. Um, I, like I said, I'll see people short term just for the purpose of writing their letter. And um, I've signed my name to hundreds of those letters. And I'm aware, as well as many aware cisgender therapists are aware of the fact that signing my name on a letter like this could potentially be an issue, you know? Like, what if someone's mom is really upset that their child is transitioning, their adult child is transitioning, and I've written a letter? Like, I'd be a really easy target. But what I really would like cis people to hear is trans people are really easy targets every day of their lives. And so if you really want to show up and be an ally, sign your name. But don't sign your name to a letter before first getting trained properly on how to write a letter and pay for it. Ideally, pay for it, you know, from a trans clinician, and learn how to do it right, and up against your biases, and like show up, because that's a lot of the feedback I hear from people who have seen cis therapists after cis therapists is like, yeah, they won't write my letter, or they don't get it, or whatever. And I mean, essentially denying care to trans people is what's happening. It's not cool to just say, I'm not comfortable with that, and not refer out. So that's kind of harsh advice, but it's really important.
Yeah, it's what you see.
Mm-hmm.
And it's happening all over the place. I was very lucky with my trauma therapist that she was so open and so quick to learn everything that she needed to do.
Yeah.
And the openness was there. I felt very comfortable to state my boundaries and my needs and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I know for a lot of people, there's just the access is just not there, or
yeah,
it's hard.
More people than there should. Yeah.
And I guess you're also performing like an amazing service to the community with the trauma therapy as well. Because I mean, that's already something that I feel should be on prescription for literally like every human being who needs it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I do think it's, you know, that's difficult to access, I think, for a lot of people. And then I think additionally accessing trauma therapy with an affirming person is doubly difficult.
You know, like I said, it was kind of by accident, but it's pretty cool to wake up and know that I'm doing exactly what I should be doing here in my life. Like I just feel that with all of my being, and I feel really grateful to know that, have that, to be doing that.
Yeah, I love that. Do you think that it takes someone to understand surviving trauma to be a good trauma therapist?
Yeah.
Yeah, same. So
I do.
that's amazing. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for your time today. If people want to find you, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me, Patrick Walden Psychotherapy, on Facebook, and you can also go to my website if you're interested in learning more about what I do and my services at patrickwaldentherapy.com.
Awesome. I will add those to the footnotes of the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed it or found it insightful, please leave me a review and share it with others. You can find the Transection podcast on social media, or go to mooksharrishill.com/transection to sign up to our mailing list. See you next time.